Well, hey there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Before Conference Conversations. My name is Jonathan Page. I am the Director of Connectional Ministries for Innovation and Creativity in the Virginia Annual Conference, and I'm here today with my friend Warren Harper. Warren is formerly our conference lay leader. He's the head of our delegation laity in the Virginia Conference, and he's a member of Williamsburg United Methodist Church. And we're going to talk about discipleship today.
We are.
And as a legislative committee, which is surely what Jesus was thinking of when he invited people to be his disciples. Warren, thanks for taking some time to be with us today. I wonder if you'd, just as we're kind of getting started here, tell us a little bit about your calling to the work of General Conference and why you're a part of this delegation.
I think it's probably a 40-plus year trail.
Wow.
After coming home from Vietnam, getting into youth work and teaching about life, because we find Matthew 28, go and make disciples, as something that I have followed all these years. So that's primarily why discipleship has a spot in my heart. Sure. Because it's easier for me and my psyche to handle that legislative, in this case, a legislative committee.
Sure. Sure. And that it sounds like speaks to a lot of why discipleship was the legislative committee you wanted to be a part of. Now, this is not your first time to General Conference, I'm thinking.
No, my first was 2016.
Okay.
And then 2019.
And when you served in 2016, which legislative committee were you a part of?
I was on local church.
Okay.
Yep.
So as you've kind of been preparing for the upcoming General Conference coming, by the way, April 23rd through May 3rd, 2024 in Charlotte, North Carolina, have you noticed just kind of a distinctiveness in the way the legislation's put together for the discipleship committee versus your time serving on the local church committee?
I think it's primarily put together by the Board of Discipleship, the ministry end. It started with Junius Dodson, and now with Jeff Campbell.
Sure. So
you find there's about 20 pieces of legislation that are coming directly out of the board.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So that's the primary lead.
Mm-hmm.
There are the remainder of the 30 some odd pieces of legislation are from other folk that are concerned about other issues that surround the total disciple area of
the discipling work
church.
of the church.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. I'm curious in kind of, we'll talk in a few minutes about your preparation and kind of how you've worked with your legislative committee in advance of General Conference. You bring up Junius Dodson, one of the real, I think, an incredible leader of the church. For those who are listening who aren't familiar with that name, Junius Dodson was the general secretary of the General Board of Discipleship, amongst a number of other things, and unfortunately passed away in sort of the intermediate time between the 2020 General Conference and 24. One thing, and this kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, with people. One of the pieces of conversation leading up to General Conference, I think, has been how do we deal with people who are no longer a part of the United Methodist Church? So in large part, that's been if folks have disaffiliated, but prior to disaffiliating, put in legislation and things like that, trying to kind of flag that sort of thing. For somebody like Junius, who beloved, but is now a part of the Communion of Saints.
Correct.
Does that impact anything in terms of the legislation that's proposed if that person has passed away?
No. The legislation was put together by a committee with Junius at the head for the 2020 conference. And it was prepared by a committee of folk and signed by and submitted by Bishop Webb, who is no longer
That's an important
no longer a United Methodist bishop.
Right.
But it stays as the 2024 issue.
Right.
And some of the folk that I'm working with on a subcommittee from across the country were a part of listening to Junius talk about the 2020 hopefuls.
Yeah, of course.
So they have some history that I don't. I have my history about Junius is through the conference lay leaders.
Yeah, of course.
And so I miss him from that aspect.
Of course. Yeah, I think I miss him too. And certainly he had the kind of vision for the church that I think we really wanted to lean into in a lot of ways. And such a, I think what you've just illustrated so important, right? Somebody like Junius who's passed away, very different from somebody like Bishop Webb who's disaffiliated, right? And and then all of it's done on behalf of one of the general boards and agencies of the church. So so that's part of the and that's part of the complexity of the work, right? Is you can't we can't just discount and say, well, this person did this, so that, right? No, you have to see the bigger picture.
It's the total picture.
Yeah,
yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Warren, as you've kind of looked at the legislation that's coming up, you mentioned the General Board of Discipleship's responsible for about half of the legislation that's coming in this legislative committee. Are there just Can you talk with people about some of the themes that are present in this legislative committee, or just the overall kind of mapping of what's coming before you?
The board in 2020 created a set of strategic priorities that they wanted to accomplish with the revised legislation. And very quickly, it was an intentional disciple-making process in the church that they wanted to create. An engagement with people currently outside the church. And the last is cultivating local contextual resources around the globe. So it's a total picture and changing some language within the existing discipline from 2016 that they were hoping to create by their 20 pieces of legislation.
So if we can kind of break those down a little bit. So in terms of an intentional disciple-making process, for somebody who hears that, they might say, so does that mean we're going to be required to do a certain program in our local church? Is that kind of my sense is that's probably not what the legislation is. It's probably more creating some pathways and things like that. But do you have a sense of kind of what that looks like?
It is they have developed over the last 4 years. They've changed their internal mechanisms, how they operate, and they've changed some foci that Jeff Campbell is working with and has worked with his team.
And just so folks are aware, Jeff Campbell is now the current General Secretary of Discipleship Ministries. And
a former pastor of mine, no less.
There you go.
So
we like pastors around here, I hope.
Kind of keep things together.
Sure.
Just a little bit. But the intent of the legislation is to change language, get rid of the stuff that's no longer needed that confuses you and I.
Sure.
And develops a pathway for local church to take the piece that they like and not necessarily the piece that I like.
Got it.
And allow the church to develop a direction that they choose.
Sure. Well, and that sounds like a bit of that last point you made about contextuality, right? And being able to not legislate and say you must do these 854 things, but really kind of giving you a bevy of options that you can then kind of pick and choose what fits in your setting. And then that second idea of, engaging with people who are not currently in the church. There's this kind of buzzword that we use sometimes of evangelism that occasionally is frowned upon. I think a lot of times has been co-opted. Do you sense is that are we okay with evangelism? Is that kind of what that heads towards?
We are. We kind of get a bad rap when we use that term.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing more and more of is just getting outside the box that we call church and finding how we got to church, who we went by.
Right.
Junius's logo on my lapel says, "See all the people."
Right. Right.
And his intent was that on our way to the supermarket, on our way to family gatherings, that we see everybody and what's going on. And that's critically important for the ministry of the church when we come outside the church and walk our community, walk the sidewalks and find out who's there in the middle of the winter and who's there in the middle of the summer.
Sure.
Because it changes.
Sure.
So therefore, our ministry outside the door needs to be flexible.
Yeah. And I think there's so much of that spirit of mutuality, right? Yeah. Where it's a lot of what I've kind of perceived in my reading of the legislation is fostering this. It's not we're trying to get out of the box of us to people, and how can we be with people? How can we be in community and develop that sort of mentality instead of sometimes when I hear the word evangelism, I think of somebody with like the sandwich board sign and a megaphone and kind of
staying out of box.
Yes. And we've got to escape that kind of mentality in a lot of ways. So one thing that we've been asking folks in these conversations is it seems like there are kind of three, as we think about General Conference as a whole, there are these sort of three themes of where stuff is landing, and that's regionalization, the revision of the social principles, and removal of harmful language from the Book of Discipline. Is anything in discipleship, in the Discipleship Legislative Committee, falling in those three kind of categories?
There is, starting at the bottom and coming back up to the top, there is legislation to be more inclusive.
Sure.
And that takes different faces. And more or less just tweaking language. As opposed to coming in with a hammer and a sickle and getting rid of a lot of stuff. Although the Board of Discipleship is moving a lot of things with regard to young people.
Right.
So that's a huge change in language and ideology, which we need to do.
Yeah, of course.
We need to do. What was the
revision of the social principles, which I'm thinking is not really a part of the discipleship legislation from what I've read.
No. Yeah. It's more tweaking language, eliminating paragraphs that we no longer need, or we can find them in another paragraph.
Right.
Which is more pertinent to what today is.
Sure.
So,
and then regionalization, I think.
I think I don't find too much in the legislation regarding that, because that's a different area of the church, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think will be really interesting is if regionalization legislation passes, I think it could impact discipleship and being able to think more contextually about how do we disciple people well in the U.S.
Absolutely.
And what lessons can we...
Getting out the door and finding where all the people are.
Exactly. Any particular petitions that are standing out that you're like, hey, we should, if you're really into this, you want to open up your ADCA to petition number 208, whatever kind of thing? Or
I think anything in the 1200s having to do with the youth changing that's where my heart is, because that's why I started my ministry with my wife, Sandy. We were youth directors, high school age, for about 10 years.
Wow.
And that was immediately after I got back from Vietnam. So my whole thing was teaching about life.
Yeah, sure.
Because mine had to be rebuilt. And sometimes high school kids need to be rebuilt. And we're talking now about young adults.
Yeah.
I still talk to my old MYF kids.
Yeah.
They've got kids in college.
Sure.
That's why I'm 35.
Yeah,
So.
that's right. That's right. Me too. Yeah, we're all 35. No, it's definitely. I know. Like I cut my teeth doing youth ministry, and that's a big part of my vocation. And we used to talk all the time how can we remind students that when they graduate from high school, they're not also graduating from the church.
Correct.
And so the legislation for young people is I've been reading. I think what you're saying is it's how can we make a more accessible church for young people,
Absolutely.
inviting young people into leadership, inviting young people to be able to really let us older folks get out of the way.
Correct.
So that young people can be the present and future of the
and
church.
I think a lot if we've got colleges near or within our mission field,
right.
we need to be very conscious of that.
Right.
Our Wesley organizations are important, but it's more important for the churches to come on board.
Yeah.
And welcome not only the students but the professors and the parents. They're there for holidays. They're there for homecoming.
Yeah.
So it's just it's an eye-opening time.
Yeah.
And we
it
need
is.
to have wide eyes.
I think so. I think you're exactly right. So, as you think about your preparation, right? We're coming up. We're recording this in kind of late February.
Yeah.
So we're a couple months away. Folks will be hearing it a little bit closer to General Conference. I'm assuming you're working with a group from your legislative committee to kind of do stuff. What's that been like?
It's like birthing a new child.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's a lot of new folk, young folk, never been to General Conference.
Mm-hmm.
So all the language is new. Sure. All the processes are new. But the basic idea of discipleship is not new.
Right.
So we have to marry everything. And we've just really now, as of last night, as a matter of fact, started to put together how we feel about these legislations. Okay. We started with the lay servant ministry and the lay mission area of a couple. There's 4 pieces of work there. So it's a matter of going through and just making sure that the language that somebody wants to change doesn't hurt what's already there.
Right.
And then make that point so that when we do get to Charlotte,
mm-hmm.
we don't waste a lot of time in committee.
Right.
With things that we don't have to.
Right. I think that's...
So the consent calendar is magically being created as you're reading information.
Sure. Well, and I think that's so helpful and an important reminder to folks. Like you've got dozens of disciplinary petitions that are before you, and all of those take time to consider. So the more organized you can be going in, the more adept you're going to be to getting that work done. And it's a tight window that the legislative committees are meeting in.
And different parts of the country handle things differently.
Sure.
So we have to be very cognizant of that. And the other critical thing, which destroys me personally, mm-hmm. is the fact that we don't have our African, Filipino, European folk with us discussing, because they're just not a part of it yet, because they don't have the documentation.
Right.
And that hurts.
Yeah. Well, it makes the lift that much more when you get to Charlotte, right?
Absolutely.
Of just being able to make sure everybody's being caught up to speed.
So that's going to draw out the
course.
conversation once we do get to Charlotte.
Of course.
And we have to be careful not to oppress because you've already discussed it and decided something, maybe, because we need to keep the conversation open and fluid.
Sure. Yeah, otherwise, you run into that colonialism thing pretty quickly.
Very easily.
And pretty easily.
Very easily.
So, Warren, as we're kind of coming to the close of our time together, I wonder, tell folks, just when we get to May 3rd, General Conference is closing, what's the story that you hope we're telling when we're coming home from Charlotte?
That Charlotte was good.
Yeah.
That our Lord and Savior is the focus. In my case, that discipleship flourishes however we've created it or recreated it so that it would help our local churches.
Sure.
It's going to be critically important that the laity understand. I'm not discounting the clergy, but it's important that the laity understand what occurred, what's best for them based on the new language or how we're going to do stuff, and marry it with their local church programs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I hope comes out of it.
And even beyond program, not to just add on, but finding those spaces for relationship, right?
Absolutely.
Where I think that's part of the future is getting out of the mentality that programs are going to solve everything and getting into the place of building relationship.
It's what you and I talk about.
That's exactly right.
That's what's going to.
That's it. That's so true. So, Warren, any sort of closing thoughts or remarks? Anything you'd want people to know that we haven't covered today?
No, I think we're good.
Good. Well, I want to thank you for taking some time to keep people informed. And for all of you in the Virginia Annual Conference who are tuning in, thank you so much for taking the time to learn more about General Conference. We're going to continue to be releasing videos about the before conference conversations in the coming days and weeks. And if you want any more information about General Conference, what's going on, we have thematic videos that we've already released. We've got some print resources that are available. You can find those at our website, vaumc.org/ wow, let's try that again. vaumc.org/GC 2024. So Warren, thank you so much for your time. Friends, we will see you soon with another before conference conversation in the near future. For now, God bless you. Enjoy the day, and we'll be seeing you real soon. Take care. Thanks, Warren.